appreciate it. I know everyone's really, really busy. So I just felt it was important, whether it's admin staff, limo care, IFT, events, this information is applicable to everyone that is employed here, in my opinion. And I think maybe the more that you know about it, the more that you'll realize that too. I can guarantee that everyone in this room will learn something about the comm center today that you didn't already know, whether it's what we do, what we're doing with our time, the resources that we have, and the ways that we can help all of you specifically. Also, you'll find that our comm center is significantly different than any comm center you've ever imagined. So obviously we're a private agency, so that brings a whole nother element to the process. We're not, taking 911 calls in there directly from the caller. And even people that we get, like we just hired Daylin, she was a lieutenant at Denver Health. She has learned a lot in our comm center because we just do things a lot differently. We have different resources available to us, and we have different resources that we use to help us. So that's kind of what I'm going to go over today. So it's more of just a specific to our comm center. It's not like a dispatching 101, here is how to dispatch. It is general information about our comm center and the capabilities that we have, the skills that our dispatchers have to have, as well as all the resources that we have available to us and to the resources we have to help the crews and to help anybody in the building. So just kind of a brief overview of what exactly it is that we do and what our comm center is all about. So just a brief overview of our comm center. Obviously, it's a central hub of all operations. So we have all of the buildings direct phone call directions. That's why it's really, really important, why we put it all over Crew Scheduler. If you need to reach someone in the building, call their extension directly. Do not call the comm center and ask to be transferred. And we'll go over all that as well and why that specifically is important. We obviously have the capability to help you get transferred to anyone in the building and get you to where you need to go. But I will go into depth as to why that's not proper utilization of our resources. Obviously, all driver and crew member communication via radio and via phone. We have all foot traffic. Obviously, everybody comes into that room and clocks in, so we see everybody's faces. So just reminding you that there are a lot of people in there, and especially with the headsets in there, you can't necessarily tell if someone is on the phone. That's a part of my dreamscape, to have the call lights on all the consoles so that if a light is illuminated, it's quiet in there. That's why you'll see also why we have the lights off in there. It's not always if someone has a migraine or we like to take naps under our desk. It is specifically we found that if the lights are off, people are quiet and they stay out. And that's specifically what we're trying to accomplish when we have the lights out in there. We obviously have the equipment checkout, so we're doing a lot of interactions with all the crews in addition to our day-to-day duties. So that's another reason why it gets really, really loud. Everyone has to come in there to clock in. Everyone has to come in there to get their equipment. The schedule building and management, Danielle is in a transition role as well as I am. So we're going through transition of who is doing what in the building, specifically as it pertains to limo care. But just know, Danielle specifically, some of you may not know this, we started this model with Center at Lincoln in 2013. So we developed a model for that specific facility that we were going to schedule all of their patients' appointments. So we do about 320 trips for the Center at Lincoln a month. All of those appointments we've called and scheduled. We've set those transports up for the facility and for the patients. It has a strategic value to us because we get to facilitate double loads. If we have two patients going to the same doctor's office, we can take them at the same time on certain vehicles, of course. And then most every facility, they want their patients to go out at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, which isn't conducive to our business. So we decided to kind of take that on. It not only gets us more integrated into these facilities, but it also alleviates a nurse so that they can do nursing stuff, so that they're not paying a nurse $35 an hour to call and schedule appointments. So that is specifically one of the things that Danielle has on her plate. In addition to, she's kind of a backup dispatcher in that role. We specifically sit her there because that's exactly what we need. We need extra people in there to be able to navigate the schedule and to be, answering the phones ultimately. But just know, Danielle specifically, if she picks up the phone or if I pick up the phone, we're technically extras in the comm center. So we have our regular dispatch schedule, and then Danielle and I are extra people in the comm center. So if you have either myself or Danielle picking up the phone, that means we're really, really busy in there. That means the dispatcher's already busy taking another call. So just know there's other things that going on behind the scenes that you might not necessarily know about. Come on in, guys. Have a seat. We also call and confirm every single appointment, including pre-scheduled ambulance trips for the following day. So that is also very time-consuming when we're running 50 limo care calls in a day. So we call ahead for every single trip to make sure it's going off so that we don't, get there and cancel on scene and show up and not have a transport taking place. So our communication center, these are our main resources that we have available to us. Obviously, we have our new phones. We just got, it's probably been a year and a half now since we've had those phones. Just know they are extremely, extremely sensitive. We have all recorded lines, so anytime that you call any line in the building, the phone call is recorded. So know that when you're calling in or when we're dialing out, I cannot tell you the amount of times that has absolutely saved us. For some reason a call gets deleted, something like that, or, a credit card information, we, shred the wrong piece of paper, something like that. It has saved us so many times. And so we'll show up Elms Haven is a prime example. They are a perfect example of you show up and they tell you that the wrong level of service was ordered. It happens to us all the time. You get up there with a stretcher, they say, oh, we ordered wheelchair. Okay, well, I'm just going to listen to the call real quick. Because we want to make sure that we're sending the proper level of service, from a quality assurance side on our side, making sure that the proper resource is dispatched, as well as their staff knowing that, no, actually it was, so-and-so that actually ordered the stretcher and not a wheelchair. So we do have recorded lines. Know as well, when I pull those calls, I can hear every single conversation happening in the break room. They're really, 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 really sensitive, which does include the break room, even when the door is closed. So just, keep in mind, that you're obviously right next to the comm center, but keep in mind we can hear everything that you say on those recorded lines. Headsets versus handsets, like I mentioned, you can hear everything, and those headsets are particularly sensitive. So if someone is speaking on a headset, it's really, really loud. Those are, extra sensitive because your mouth is a little bit farther away. So they, have the technology to pick up directly what you're saying, but they also pick up everything in the background. So know that, especially if someone is on a headset, it's very, very sensitive. Also know that you might not necessarily be able to tell that they are on the phone if they are on a headset. Like I said, it's my dreamscape to have those console lights so that you can tell when they're on the phone. But just know, just because you can't actively see someone on a handset doesn't mean that they're not on the phone. Radio transmissions. So like I said, we're the central hub of operations as well as communication. So every single radio transmission obviously goes to the comm center. We find that on average, every single ambulance call has 6 transmissions. It's the initial dispatch when you're en route, on scene, transporting clear, when we send you to post, and when you're at the post. So with an average of 35 calls a day, that's 245 radio transmissions in a day. So that is a lot. That also includes why we like to use, one of the portables when we're sitting at one of the other desks, because the dock station that we have, it's a lot better quality. It has higher amps, so it's able to transmit and receive better communication. But obviously, not everyone is sitting on that side of the room. So that's kind of a downfall for us. But this specific reason is why we've broken multiple radios, because we're clicking that mic exponentially more than you guys are in your ambulance. So we've broken several radios because we are just clicking the button all the time. So remember too that, if you might not hear us on the radio, or we might not answer you back right away, that's probably because we're, on the phone, or, sometimes we do have those radio issues, which we hope to not have, but sometimes we do. But that is a lot of radio transmissions, 245 in a day, and that's just with a 35 call day. You know, we've hit 49, we've yet to hit 50 ambulance calls in a day, but that is a lot of radio transmissions. Phone calls, we take over 2,000 calls a week in the comm center. So, you know, on average, some of them you can take a call in a minute and a half. Some of them are 12 minutes long where it's grandma trying to give you her credit card information. So we do field those sort of calls in the comm center as well. Most every billing call comes through the comm center as well. On our invoices, it says if you have any questions, please call the billing department, 720-630-2020. But they'll always call the number on the letterhead, always. Same thing when if you call somebody and you leave a message from your cell phone and you're like, hey, it's Hannah with Stadium. How many times has this happened? Where you say, call me back on my cell phone number. This is my cell phone. And they call you back on the landline because they're like, oh, it's Stadium. So people always do that. They'll always call the number on the letterhead. Not always, but most of the time, we are getting all the billing calls, transferring them back to billing. We try to say, like, wait, before you get too far, if this is a billing question, we'll send you over. But those calls do take quite a bit of time as well. So know that there's 2,000 calls, and they are not short calls. So this is just a brief synopsis. So we use Vonage Business as our phone lines. And this is just our basic dashboard so when I go in and I'm going to pull a recorded call, this is what it looks like for me. This is the last 30 days. So over the last 30 days, we've fielded over 12,000 calls and have over 8 days of recording. So that's a lot of calls. You'll also note this is just last week. Last week we fielded 479 calls. You'll notice here. So this was 1 day of 1 week. This was last Wednesday. There was 479 calls in 1 day. So this is last week. Last week we fielded 2,448 calls. So a lot of calls coming to and fro. This is another reason why I want to help everyone gain an understanding about the comm center. So we use, most of you have seen the grid, especially those of you on limo care, or if you've been on limo care, you're familiar with the grid and the purpose that the grid has. But we have all of our ambulance calls are in the CAD, so they're in two separate systems. So all of the ambulance calls are on the grid and in the CAD. The limo care calls are in the CAD or in the grid only, unless we're billing insurance, those get added retroactively. So the CAD is just our central dispatching system for the ambulance calls specifically. How many, if you may know this, how many users, or have you even thought that there might be a specific number of users that can only be in the CAD at one time? Has that ever crossed your mind? So we only have 4 CAD licenses in the whole company, and 3 of those are utilized by the billing department. So the same system that we put the calls into is the same system that they're extracting that information and ultimately, us getting paid for the call. So we have 4 licenses. That's why when you walk into the comm center, it's who's dispatching right now, because we only have 1 person that can be in the CAD at any given time. Just to give you a rough idea, the reason why that is, we're getting to a point where it's maybe okay to maybe purchase another license if we find that it's necessary. We've found in the past that it's actually counterintuitive to what we're trying to accomplish in the comm center. We've had so many instances where, it's late at night in the evening and there's an extra CAD license available, and there's, one dispatcher gets on and they say, oh, we've got an extra CAD license available, I'll help you out. They both have a radio. You say, Medic 12, we're transporting, blah, 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 and one person thinks they're helping and the other person has them at destination because you've both clicked and you've both made entries into the CAD. So it actually, the way that our system is set up in the comm center, it works a lot better to just have one person dealing with that. If we had 50 ambulances on, we might do, you take care of 1 through 25, I'll take care of 26 through 50, and we'll be on different radio channels. Sometimes we do that for the big events, like Decadence, like I'll be dispatching the cars at the event, and then someone else will be dispatching our regular IFT cars. That's why at a lot of the big events, we'll switch to a different radio channel, because you have a different dispatcher at that time. So it's not necessarily helpful to have multiple CAD licenses in the comm center. We haven't really found that we really needed another one, unless, you know, sometimes if we're getting backed up and there's multiple calls in the queue and we've got to build a bunch, we'll ask the billing department to give one of theirs up for a couple minutes so that we can just get the calls built in there. Also note that everyone in that comm center is a call taker and a dispatcher. So it's not necessarily a process that we're sold on, but it works for what we're doing right now. So everyone that's in the comm center has to be cross-trained in what's going on. Because that only one person has the CAD doesn't mean that they're the only ones that need to know what's going on. Everybody needs to know what's going on, so everybody needs to be trained to take the calls. Otherwise, that person with the CAD literally has to get every single phone call because they're the only one that knows what's going on. That's why we put the ambulance calls into the grid as well, because we don't have separate call takers and dispatchers. Even if we did have separate call takers, we'd have to have 2 phone numbers so that, hey, you're the call taker for limo care, you're the call taker for the ambulances. That's why everybody knows what's going on. We're constantly updating the grid as far as vehicle posts and for obviously the limo care trips. So anybody in there can field any sort of, you know, troubleshooting issue that you might have. But just FYI that everybody in there, they answer the phone, they can help you, they know what's going on, or at least they should. I always tell them too, it's never anyone else's responsibility to make sure that you know the information. So if the person that's dispatching from the CAD hasn't updated the grid so you can't see live what's going on, it is your responsibility to know what's going on. So you can say, hey, where's so-and-so? Can you update the grid for me, please, with that information? So ultimately, everybody in there, no matter if they have the CAD or not, it is their responsibility to know what is going on because it is their responsibility to answer the phone. Contracts. So as most of you know, so actually we just got the Center of Northridge as well. So these are our primary contracts. Obviously the top 2 are by and large ambulance contracts. We do run a fair amount of wheelchair calls out of Centura and a fair amount of wheelchair calls out of Health One. But mostly for Centura specifically, those are mostly ambulance calls. We have, these ones are primarily exclusive wheelchair transportation contracts. The center at Lincoln, which is in Lone Tree. We have 2 Powerback locations, both exclusive contracts. One is Powerback Lakewood and the other is Powerback in Lafayette. We also have Life Care of Evergreen, which if you've ever been there, it's not as far as it sounds. So we run a lot of calls down to Golden, down to Lakewood, to St. Anthony's. So we do a fair amount of trips for them as well. And we recently added the center at Northridge, which is in Westminster as well. Centura, we have specific response requirements that we are required to meet. So we track not only our on-time performance, but we track our contractual compliance as well. So we want to know not only were we late to the call, but did we make that ETA based on the confines of our contract? So we have several different priorities, and the dispatchers have to know which priorities to choose based on the hospital group. So it's just kind of a little nuance because we can only extract correct information if we have the correct information going in. So they have to know which priorities to choose in the CAD. So to build a Centura call, how many of you know in here, I hope some of my blue shirts know this, how many, Travis, how many of you know how long do we have to get to a Centura ER? 30 minutes. 30 minutes. And how many minutes, if they request an ASAP, and as soon as possible off of the floor, off of the Centura, how many minutes do we have to get there? 20. So off the floor is an hour. Yeah, off the floor is an hour. And then obviously, sometimes they'll pre-schedule for several hours out. So they'll have to know based on the ordering facility. So sometimes we'll have like Health South call, and they want a trip and the patient's discharging from the ER. That's kind of different because that's not under our contract because we still want to be there obviously quickly, but it's a little bit different. So they have to know not only the contractual compliance arrangements, but they have to know who's with where and which priority to choose based on who the caller is. Yeah.
So is that the same for both wheelchair and ambulance for the hour and the...
Wheelchair is an hour out of the ER.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a little bit different.
What about the I remember like a couple months ago, there was like a stroke alert that was over at 84th ER.
STEMIs are 15 minutes.
And a STEMI minute? Okay.
Yeah, STEMIs are 15 minutes specifically. And that is the strategic reason why we post where we post. So our primary posting location is St. Anthony North at the 84th campus. That doesn't mean in the area, near the hospital, 84th and I-25. That means we are literally in the bay at the 84th campus. We want them to look out the window and, say they have a cardiac alert that's coming in. I cannot tell you the amount of times that they have grabbed our crews out of the break room to help them in the ER because they're understaffed. It is our purpose to be, helpful to them in any way that we can, and obviously be expeditious in getting those patients out and getting them repatriated to a proper facility. Most of the time, those higher level of care calls are coming out of the 84th St. Anthony's campus. You guys may not know this story, but the original St. Anthony North was at 84th and I-25. When they built the brand new hospital at 144th and I-25, guess what they called it? St. Anthony North. So now the old St. Anthony's is now a freestanding emergency room. So it is not equipped to take any serious patient, but grandma still walks in there with chest pain. So, maybe a little education through the community, but people still continue to go in there with serious issues. So we're doing a lot of ALS transports out of there to different hospitals. That includes STEMI. So good point. Our response requirements for a STEMI, we have to be at a Centura facility within 15 minutes. We can get here up to 84th and I-25 in about 11 minutes emergent. So we do go emergent to those calls. So that's a major cardiac event. They're having an active heart attack. That's what a STEMI is. It's based on what they're seeing on the monitor. So obviously that's an ALS response. We have to send an ALS car to those, and we have 15 minutes to get to those. Most of the time, depending on our geography, we will go emergent to those calls. When we first started that specific project with Centura, they have a specific marker that they track, and it's called the door to balloon time. So they're specifically tracking how many minutes it takes from when that person walks in with chest pain to the 84th ER, how many minutes does it take for them to be transferred and in the cath lab at the 144th campus. So I think when we started, it was like 146 minutes. Who can take a stab at, since we started working on that project, how many minutes the door to balloon time is?
45.
Not that good. It is, I think, about 84 minutes. So we've considerably cut that down. So we've got 30 minutes to get to St. Anthony's in Lakewood, any St. Anthony's, any Centura. This includes Longmont United, by the way. So we always give, a 60 to 90 minute ETA. We don't want to be late. We want to obviously give them an accurate time when we think we're going to actually show up. But obviously on our reports, those are going to pull out of compliance because we have the same contract for every facility, no matter where it is. Who can tell me our average ETA to St. Anthony's in Lakewood?
Emergent or
8 minutes. Because, again, that's why we have the posting plan the way we have it. Because most of our response times are 0 minutes because we're sitting in the bay. So that's why we have it built that way. Obviously, Centura is the bread and butter of our IFT division. We've got literally all of our eggs in that basket. So we need to make sure that we are doing an exceptional job for them, including having 0 minute response times. And it's cool too when you're taking the call, and the way I like to take calls is they say, "Hi, this is so-and-so with St. Anthony's," and they say we have a transport, and I say, "What's the patient's name?" I never go for the, "What time are you wanting?" or, "Is that for later?" Or is it out of the ER? I just, what's the patient's name? When she tells me it's out of the ER, I know they want it right now. And when I say, I've got a crew in your bay, they're like, oh, yeah, okay, awesome. They get really, really happy because that's generally not the service that they're being given. We also have the same contract as 5 other private ambulance providers in the area. We helped them develop their contract and what it would look like because we didn't want them to be in a situation where they had to use us. While that might be advantageous to us, it's not to them, because if we start doing a crappy job, we don't want them to not have an out, and we want them to use us based solely on the fact that they want to. So just know, we've had a couple people, march into an ER and say, why did we just see Apex pull in? We have an exclusive contract. That's not correct. So they genuinely use us because we want to, and because they want to, and because we do a good job. So that's why we're going to continue to have those posting plans. That's why we're going to continue to meet those ETAs and our on-time compliance, or our contractual compliance as well. Health One. So the Health One they've got their own comm center where essentially we are acting as the comm center for Centura. They usually call us first. If we can't do it, we really release it out to mutual aid, which is very, very rare. For Health One, they have their own comm center that calls us directly for calls. They say, can you be there at noon? We say yes or no. And if we can't, then they move on and they call other providers. Who can tell me what happens if we're late to a Health One call? If we've committed to an ETA and we are late beyond that?
Their call center calls you guys.
We are fined. We literally are fined monetarily. So if you dip below a certain percentage of on-time performance, you literally are fined as an agency. Yeah.
Is it still for wheelchair and ambulance, or just?
Yes, wheelchair and ambulance. Yep. So if we are late beyond any ETA that we have settled upon with the comm center, we are fined.
So any call, like one time?
No, it is a cumulative percentage of on-time performance.
Okay.
Yeah. But those add up, especially now that they just restructured all of Health One's contracts. We're technically used as an overflow provider for them. So basically they will call us primarily when their primary provider isn't available. So when you are running one call in a month and you're late to that call, guess what? That's 100% late. 0% on-time compliance. So it's really, really important, especially because we don't run that many calls. The grid. Like I said, most of you guys have seen the grid, have heard about it, have developed your own opinions about why it is that we use it, about the usability of the grid. But for what we have been doing and for what we're doing now, it seems to be the best resource that we have available to us. Yeah, it would be great to integrate all of our wheelchair calls into the CAD, although we cannot get a snapshot of future calls. There's no way to do that in the CAD. It shows a list of calls, but when you take, calls for future in the day, there's no way to know if you have availability at that time unless you have some sort of visual telling you what your availability looks like. It is a living, breathing document. All of the limo care drivers, they can see the grid at any given time on their phone. So and if anything cancels or changes, we provide them communication via email about that change, but they get a live update on that iPhone. That's why they have iPhones in all the cars. Yes, so the cool thing about it though is that you don't necessarily get this benefit on the ambulance side because they can't see what else is going on. I think from a limo care perspective, you can kind of deduce that we're busy. Sometimes our ambulances are out of cell phone range. We're doing all that communication via phone. Don't deduce automatically that if the radio is not busy, then we are not busy. Because I can assure you that's likely not the case. Sometimes you might walk into the comm center at the beginning of your shift and your shift starts at 9 a.m. and the dispatcher is, getting coffee or, talking with some of the crews, that's because it's at 9 in the morning. So don't assume that because when you come in for your shift, they're kind of in a relaxed environment. Don't assume that that's what they do all day long. The different colors on the grid mean certain things. Teal is a double load, so obviously 2 patients that we take at one time. Orange is a wide wheelchair. So we always have these visual cues. That's, the whole reason that the grid exists. I can tell you all the cars, even the colors of the cars on the grid, they stay the same color. What color is limo 3? Red, exactly. Because you have those visual cues where you don't actually need to read the information to be able to tell what's going on. So we know orange. We have 3 vehicles that cannot take a wide wheelchair. Orange is a wide wheelchair. So we know if we see an orange box on limo 3, 5, or 7, we're screwed. So we've got to navigate some other process in order to get a car with a wider ramp there. Pink means something's pending. So when we put it in the grid, right away we turn it pink because that means it needs attention in some way or another. When we've sent it out to the driver, when we've dispatched it, specifically on the limo care side, we put 2 little asterisks on the bottom. That means that it's been sent. That means that it tells everybody in the comm center, no matter what role you're in that day, you know that by looking at the grid, if it's pink and has the 2 asterisks, that means that it's been sent to the driver, but the driver has not confirmed. When the driver confirms the call, that's when it gets turned back white. Everything is back set in stone and the day rolls off as it will. Yellow is specifically for us. Sometimes the drivers will call and say, hey, there's a yellow call on my grid. Is this special? But what that means, specifically for the grid, since it's a week by week, day by day type document, we are physically going in manually and adding reoccurring trips. It's not like the CAD where you can do, let's repeat this, Monday, Wednesday, Friday through the end of the year. You can't, unfortunately, do that with the grid because it is a manual entry process. If you see anything that's yellow, it's usually on a Friday or a Saturday because that means that that's a reoccurring trip and that is the last trip that we have scheduled for the patient. If you're on limo care and you see a yellow trip, feel free to call and say, hey, has this been scheduled out? I just want to make sure it's been scheduled out because that means that is our last trip that we have on the schedule. So if we forget to add it for some reason, Monday morning we're not showing up. So it's really important visual cue for us to understand that we need to do something further with a call. Green means 2 separate things on the grid. Green on the ambulance side means that it's been put into the CAD by whoever has the CAD at that time. It's been placed into the CAD. The dispatcher knows about it. Me as a call taker, if I'm going to pick up the phone and I don't have the CAD, I immediately put in the call. Just like the limo care side, I turn it hot pink and I say, hey you, I've put something on the grid. Can you add it into the CAD for me, please? So if it's green on the ambulance side, that means it's been put into the CAD. If there's a green box on the wheelchair side, that again is a visual cue for us that is an availability that we have. So you'll see contract north, contract south, CNL, powerback. We know, if it's contract north, for instance, we only want to take one of those 6 exclusive contracts. That means we don't have availability, so don't take something ridiculous. So we want to make sure that we put those green boxes in. So again, a visual cue so you can tell right away where we have availability without even looking at the calls around it. Hi.
Morning.
Red is obviously for cancel. A lot of times you'll see those as a cancel on scene. We make those red. You'll see COS at the bottom of the actual call. And then we obviously make notes as to why that was. Most of our facilities, we charge for cancel on scenes because, like I said earlier, we do confirm all of those calls. So if we confirm it, we show up the next day, and for some reason, the patient goes out to the hospital and we weren't informed, we do charge for those cancel on scenes, so we make sure that we document those appropriately. Obviously, be on the lookout. If you're on limo care, be on the lookout for your calls and where else they might be on the grid. If you've got a return for John Smith, take a peek over the grid and make sure that we didn't cancel on scene for him earlier. Since it is a manual entry process, every time that you bill the cancel on scene, obviously you need to remember to take the return trip off the schedule so we don't show up accidentally to the return trip. But now that you have this information, it's good to kind of have that in the back of your mind so you can maybe assist us in something that we might miss every now and again. Documentation is key. That is one of the main things that we are doing in there. That is the main thing that takes up our time, because every call has to have specific pieces of documentation on it. We have now 10 limo care cars, 11 ambulances usually on during the day, and 3 at night. Who can tell me what this means? Like if you get a call dispatched to you and it looks like that. Yeah.
I think it has to, I think like the original pickup time was 9 o'clock and now it's 8 o'clock.
Exactly. So that means like either we moved it up or moved it back, or maybe the patient's ready early. So the time that is not in parentheses is your actual call time from a limo care perspective. We'll try to like call and explain that to you and say, hey, patient's going to be ready early. Can you head over? I'm going to send this to you. It's going to say 8 o'clock. It's going to say 9 o'clock and 8, but don't be confused. So just an idea, that's exactly right. So the original call time is in parentheses. We move it into the box where it actually took place. So that call will actually be in the 8 o'clock time slot on the grid, and we'll incorporate the new time into the call as well. Contract compliance. So again, we want to make sure we have proper pieces of documentation. We want to document why we were out of compliance. So for Longmont United, for instance, when we get on scene at Longmont United out of the ER, and we've given a 60 to 90 minute ETA, or 60 to 75, or 75 to 90, or whatever, obviously we know it's really, really far away. We get that. When we get on scene, the CAD will pop up and say, what the heck happened here? So that's why it's really important to choose those correct priorities for Centura so that we get those error messages, because we need to document why we were out of compliance for the contract. So we'll document any of our, on-time performance flaws or any of our contractual compliance flaws. Obviously, patient information. We need to make sure we're documenting all of this. Just know as well, sometimes you're not getting all of this. And it's not necessarily because we didn't ask. Sometimes too, we'll call you and give you the information and say, hey, like I tried to get this information, but they wouldn't give it to me for some reason or another. That happens a lot to us, a lot. But I ask that you don't automatically assume it's because we didn't do our due diligence in trying to get you the information that we know that you need. So obviously we want diagnosis, any demographic information, treatment required for transport. So we know that we need simply, when it comes especially to choosing the proper call type, ALS versus BLS, we need to know not only what is the patient's diagnosis, but what is the treatment required for transport. We have to have both of those two things for every single call. So say for instance, we get a trip from 144th going to Broomfield Skilled Nursing, it's BLS, and say the dispatcher only asks, what's the patient's diagnosis? What if it's chest pain? Does that mean it's ALS? Absolutely not. Because the diagnosis alone doesn't give us enough information to establish the call type. So do they need a cardiac monitor? Most of the time, if they're going back to Broomfield Skilled, it's a no and it's BLS. They just happen to have been seen for chest pain. So we need to get all of that information. Late calls. We need to document why we were late and ultimately what the conclusion of that was. We need to obviously provide some sort of follow-up. Sometimes it's to the patient, sometimes it's to the patient's family. I make a lot of calls to the patient's families explaining why we were late. We comp a lot of trips for any particular mishaps that we might have. But we want to make sure we're tracking why we were late and what we did about it. Every single late call needs to have those two pieces of information on it.
So that's for the contract with the health one.
Yes.
So I know I've had issues when I was on the limo care or when I still run limo care cars. But when I show up there, sometimes like the nurses are like never ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Does that still count as like late, or does it just have to do with when you show up?
It's our unseen time.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And that's why it's cool now that we have the app.
Yeah.
Because it actually gives us a better idea of when you were actually on scene instead of just what you jot down on a piece of paper. But yeah, no, it's our actual unseen time.
Oh, okay.
So we don't get dinged for that if the patient's not ready. So we want to know those two pieces of information, why we were late and what we did about it. We want to make sure that we're actually notifying people about it. We're not going to be the company like others in our industry and in our area that just like show up 3 hours late and that's fine to them. We always want to be proactive. Our ultimate goal is obviously to take care of the patient, but even higher than that, our responsibility is to you guys, because we don't want you walking in. Sometimes you don't even know you're late, which is messed up to me, because you need to know that, like, hey, you know, we had to move this around. I got a call in another car and they were closer, so I'm going to send you. Yes, I realize I'm sending you from St. Anthony's West to Longmont United, but I feel that we owe you guys that explanation, because I know in the back of your head you're like, well, they've got a car up there, and little do you know that car's ALS and you're BLS, and they've got a call that's coming out of, you know, somewhere else in that area. So I always try to explain that to you guys so that you guys at least have a little bit of the backstory. We also track why we're late. So same thing. We get this pop-up if we're out of compliance of a contract, but if we're late, there's a pop-up that says, why were you late? Traffic, weather. By the way, we don't scrub any of our numbers. So when we report to Health One, when we report to Centura, I'm going to generalize and say all of the other agencies, although I know generalizing is not generally a good thing to do. Most all of the other agencies, mostly all the time, will throw out anything that involves traffic, weather, or vehicle maintenance, which to me, to us, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter why we were late. We should have been able to figure it out. If it's snowing outside and it's icy, I would dang sure hope that the person in the comm center would give you an extended ETA. So anything outside of that, obviously we're late to, and we track why that is. We also have, sometimes there's specific crews that we know it's going to be difficult to get them out of this building, which is specifically why we have you posted 8th and I-25. Because this building, one of you's talking to Jamie or Bev, one of you's in the bathroom, maybe you're in the ambulance, maybe you're talking to Megan. It is so hard, you guys, to get you guys out of this building. You don't even realize it. It is so hard, so hard. So we expect if you are going to do anything extracurricular with inside the building that is over that 15 minutes that you have to get in service, please communicate. Whether it's changing your house take or, our ambulance is dirty, we want to wash it before we go out. That's fine. That's always fine. But when we have you posted at OHQ and we get an ULFA and you're not backed out and one of you is with Bev and it takes you 5 minutes to get out of the building, that's a problem. That is a problem. So we want to make sure that you are packaged and ready to go, which means backed out, maybe even on the street, depending on what time of the day it is. You need to be ready to leave the building at any given time. So I will tell you that is one of the biggest late reasons that we have. We have pre-scheduled calls that we booked a day before that we're late to because the crew has to eat their lunch first. You need to eat before you come. You need to change your clothes before you come. We're not going to pay you to come clock in and then change your clothes. You're not ready to go. So I will tell you that is a huge reason why we are late, because crews cannot expedite out the door. And it's not, sometimes there's that isolated incident where it's a new dispatcher and they give you 30-minute ETA to Longmont United. But that's usually not the case. So documentation. We obviously need to document everything when it comes to vehicle breakdowns. Make sure that we're filling out an incident report. You guys are filling out an incident report for any accidents or anything like that. Fleetio, this has to be done by people in blue, black, and red shirts. Has to be. Sometimes what happens, specifically with vehicle breakdowns, this happened just the other day with Ambulance 14. So Ambulance 14 was built as out of service in the CAD. We build all the vehicles that are out of service into the CAD so that we don't accidentally reactivate them. It was still in the bay, happened over a weekend, was deactivated in the CAD. No documentation whatsoever in Fleetio. Rusty drove it around the block, nothing happened, and we put it back in service. No idea, who may have reported some sort of incident. No idea. So if it doesn't get in Fleetio, same thing as we're always, as you were taught in EMT school. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. So same thing as your PCRs. You need to make sure that you have proper documentation there. If you can't get into Fleetio, please come see me. I will show you how to do it. Every single person in this whole agency has their own specific login into Fleetio. So we need to make sure we know how to get in there, how to properly document something, and who to communicate with ultimately. This includes employee injuries. We need to make sure everyone's obviously filling out an incident report for any injury. Any employee injury also, immediate phone call to Megan all the time. Same thing with any accident where we've got somebody that's injured. We need to make sure we're communicating it through the appropriate channels and providing the correct documentation. Call outs. This is another thing, another type of phone call that the comm center is always fielding because we have recorded lines. So someone will call into the comm center. The staff should know that that's the proper channel to do that. Obviously, we need to be contacting the on-call, but we want all of those calls to come to the comm center. So if you're calling out, call to the comm center. We will connect you to the on-call supervisor. Obviously, we need to provide documentation for that as well. So this is a little bit hard to see, and I wish I brought my book. I have essentially created like a dispatch Bible in there. It's, you know, a well-organized flip book of all the resources that we have, which includes, again, you can't see, so like hospital biophones and door codes, or bariatric ramp instructions, hydraulic lift instructions. So any problem that you might encounter on any given day, we can absolutely provide you a resource to help you with that. It includes, you know, pertinent diagnosis questions. I'm sure you've seen things taped on their desks in there. They have the resources available to them to execute efficiently. You know, say we get a alter mental status. They have, you know, there are specific questions that they're supposed to ask for alter mental status, chest pain, shortness of breath, to ultimately determine our response time. Sometimes, like I took one the other day out of a facility who shall not be named. I took one and it was new onset altered mental status. And I said, you need to hang up and call 911. And they say, well, let me check with the doctor. So they check with the doctor. I give a 45-minute ETA. And she said, oh, 45 minutes is fine. Which to me, like, you're just like, ugh. So I usually call the crew and explain and say, hey, this is information I got. And then I take the call, send the crew, and then she calls back and is like, hey, like, I think we want to cancel that trip. So I'm thinking like, oh, good, she's going to hang up and call 911. Well, I hear the doctor in the background saying, no, it's okay. We'll just do the labs here. As if labs were the highest of your worries with a patient with altered mental status. So that does happen too. Again, realizing if you get on scene for a situation like that, it doesn't mean that the dispatcher didn't obtain the correct information or attempt to obtain it or ask the proper questions. They have the resources available to ask the pertinent questions. So that's not a thing. Let's not have that be a thing.
What does altered mental status entail for everybody?
Travis. Yeah, it's Travis. He's a good example.
Yeah,
any change in mentation from baseline. So, you know, if you don't know who you are, where you are, or maybe you didn't get out of bed to eat this morning. But specifically new onset is really, really important with chest pain, with shortness of breath, and with altered mental status. So that's an emergent response right there. So when you hear altered mental status as a dispatcher, you're like it's your red flag for sure. So we have a ton of resources. You know, what to do if we have a vehicle breakdown. You know, who do we call? What's the towing company? We've got, 2, 15, and 14. They need a different tow truck company because they're big. They need to go to a different shop because they're big. So they have to know a lot of things like that, aside from just slinging ambulances. So that is one of the main points that I want to get across. Obviously, some people in there are stronger than others. I don't want to come across like everybody in there is perfect. Obviously, we make mistakes, but we don't come after you and ask you why you didn't put a patient on this amount of oxygen or why you didn't give them a specific medication. We don't do that to you guys. So I ask, know that they have the proper resources for them. know that they're asking pertinent questions. If you ever have a question, did you ask this? Treat it as a learning opportunity. Anybody in there is willing to learn. So go to them directly, ask that question, but have a productive conversation about it. EM Resource. So EM Resource is our divert status system. It's the same system that Denver Health has. So when you are going on an OLFA and you want to know who's open, that's not necessarily a piece of air traffic you need to clog up on green. We can absolutely help you with that. We all have this open at any given time. So it includes divert statuses, missing persons, hazmat, MCI alerts, available ambulances. So if there is an MCI, when you have EM Resource up on your computer, it'll literally scream alert. It'll say alert. And so you just log in and you see, okay, what's this all about? Usually it's some sort of drill. They've been doing a lot of drills recently, with the car fires and all the acts of terrorism. So they do a lot of tests on all the providers that are active on EM Resource. One of those is, this is a drill. We have a mock MCI. How many ambulances do you have available? So we'll go in and log in and we'll say, we've got 3 ALS that we can give you right now. Also psych beds, that's a really, really big one. That's another thing that they do, like an all-call for to all the hospital providers that are active on EM Resource. Because, as you know, there is a shortage of psych beds, in the state and in the country. And that's why we're going from Longmont United to Peakview Behavioral. It's not it's like a dialysis kind of situation where it's like, well, they're at Center Lincoln. Why are they going to DeVita Lowry? It's because that's how that works. That's the only time that they have, that's the only place that they have an opening for that. So same thing, psych beds are few and far between. So they're constantly updating their alerts, how many psych beds each psych facility and each hospital have at their use. Update frequency to EM Resource. So who can tell me a good guideline of when a hospital should be updating their divert status? How often?
Every patient.
Every patient. What else?
Every hour.
Come on.
Anybody else?
lady.
There isn't a guideline.
Oh.
There is not one. So that being said, sometimes you're going to call the biophone, and you've asked us already that which hospitals are on divert, and we say everybody's open, and you call back and you say, just by the way, they're on divert, and you're like, because we can obviously only operate off the information that we have. So this is what it looks like. Those of you sitting near the computer can see a little bit better, but I'll kind of explain. So this is the region. So obviously we can minimize any regions that aren't important to us. Obviously we don't need to know, which ambulances or which psych facilities are open in Durango. Not pertinent information to us. So we can kind of see like what's going on in the north region, what's like the west metro region. So obviously our OLFA calls are going to be our central Denver region. So that's primarily the one that we have visible, but you can kind of choose. These ones are basically all the hospitals that we need to know, because that's, all the hospitals that we would typically ever go to. Anything that is yellow on here is something that's on advisory. So you'll see like this one, for instance. So this one is on advisory. You scroll over and guess what that says? It says psych. So same thing. A lot of the hospitals, if they are on advisory, 99.9% of the time it's because they can't accept any more psych patients. Sometimes it's an ICU bed, and other than that, there pretty much are no other reasons why they would be on advisory. Typically, sometimes they might have been on lockdown or something like that. But most of the time, they're on advisory for psych. So we'll make sure and let you know if you are in an OLFA that happens to be a psych case. We'll let you know. Just because the ED is not on divert doesn't mean that you can take every patient there. This one obviously doesn't have a hospital divert on it, but it literally is just written in red and it says divert. It's fairly obvious. Most of the time, the hospital that you'll see on divert is Denver Health. They're on divert the most out of anybody in the metro area, which is bad for them because they're not supposed to be on divert. Nobody is technically, but sometimes we all have to cry tilt. So you'll see Denver Health is on divert, which is really, really important for us to be keyed into this because the likelihood of us transporting an OLFA to Denver Health is like 80%. It's like huge. So we need to make sure we're paying attention to this. This is the last time it was updated. The red means that it's beyond 24 hours since the last time it was updated. So sometimes, like if it's one that we're likely to transport to, we'll just call the biophone and say, hey, just want to make sure you're open. Looks like your divert status hasn't been changed for a number of hours. So know, A, that this is the same information that Denver Health has for you, and B, it might not necessarily be up to date, and that's not because we're not looking into it. It's because it genuinely hasn't been changed. Like I said earlier, we have to know the pertinent questions for different information that we're given to by a nurse. And our information that we get is only as good as the information that is given. So a lot of times we're trying to pry this information out. You know, we all know facilities where half of them don't hardly speak English. So it's really hard when you're taking a response call specifically from a caller where you do. Okay. It's really hard to obviously get pertinent information, especially when you're asking, you know, difficult medical diagnosis questions to someone that you have a language barrier with. You see up here 3 times the 2 words dispatch sense is mentioned. This in our lives is a real thing. You ever, you know, say you're at home with your kids, and imagine your kid's a toddler, and it's quiet, and you're like, ugh, something's gone awry. It is that gut feeling, that pit in your stomach, that you're like, something right here. That is something that we get in the comm center, and it is a real thing. It is a real phenomenon that's happening. Sometimes crews might not necessarily know what's happening. Obviously, they can't see the board. They can't see where the other ambulances are. They don't know which ones are ALS, which ones are BLS. None of that. You know, they may be closer to the call, but it's a ventilator call. So we want to send someone from here because they got to get the vents. Stuff like that. So people don't necessarily understand what's happening behind the scenes because they can't see the whole board. But another reason you might be crossed or something like that is because dispatch sense is a real thing. I can't tell you how many times this has been true. If it sounds sketchy, it probably is. This one is like a huge thing to me. Like, I know if it sounds sketchy, it usually is. It usually is. Or like they'll request, a caller will request a non-emergent response. Say we're at 88th and Sheridan, the pickup is out of the center at Northridge. That's a really short commute to that area. They request a non-emergent ambulance and they're like, oh, you know, just within like 45 minutes, I'll make the decision to send the crew emergent to that call. Mostly, obviously a deduction from the information that I have, but most of the time it's my gut feeling that something's bad. And it usually, there has been very rare occasions where I've been dead wrong about it. So I'll call the crew and I'll say, hey, this is what I asked. This is the information I was given. They told me they wanted a non-emergent response. I'm going to go ahead and send you emergent anyway. And just explain, you know, the crews don't. I mean, as long as they have the communication and they have an explanation, it's not a big deal as long as we're communicating ahead of time. Dispatch sense, as far as posting plans, I can't tell you how many times where our primary post is St. Anthony's at 84th. I've like manifested into the universe that we should post to 88th and Sheridan. And next thing you know, we get an ALS out of Church Ranch. It works like that. It just does. Travis, you know, how many times as an EMS provider, even just hearing a story, or how many times has it happened to you where you're like, you know, you get an altered mental status and you're just like, and people are like, oh, he's on drugs, and you're on a rave, he's on drugs, and you're like, I think that patient's a diabetic. Because you just know. You know. And it's a real thing. So crews might not necessarily understand why you're doing what you're doing, but this definitely plays a role in it, at least when I'm at the helm, because you just know. Geography. Obviously, they're required to know the geography. All of our contracted facilities, even cities, even basic cities, knowing where the city ordinances fall. It's specifically important when we roll up on an accident. So the crew will call and say, we just rolled up on an accident, and you say, what's the direction of travel? What's the cross streets? Vehicle descriptions. So they're required to know that too, even though we're not a 911 call center. They still need to know a great deal of information so that we can communicate that efficiently to mutual aid resources. So we will dispatch police and fire to a crew that rolls up on an accident. So it is really, really important that we know where they are, because we need to know which fire department to contact. Because Lord knows it's weird. It's really weird, the way that everything is outlined. Obviously, Denver. Usually Denver. If it's in Denver, it's Denver. But pretty much everything outside of that, Broomfield, Westminster, Lafayette, Boulder, those are weird. You have to know the lines of those. Obviously, we have to know our closest unit. We have to know when we get a call, which car is going to get there the fastest. We have to know where the cars are and, obviously where the pickup is. It's obviously really, really important. Like I said, you can only act on the information that you're given. So if I send a crew, to St. Anthony's in Lakewood to post at the ED, and they're a couple blocks away at Old Chicago, that's a problem, because we don't have accurate information of where they are. If we don't know where they are, we can't give accurate ETAs, which makes us late, which makes us out of compliance, which gets us fined, everything like that. We also don't have GPS in the ambulances. So it's not like, again, it'd be great if we had another CAD license. It'd be great if we had, the module that said where the cars are. Well, that would be cool, but we'd also have to have GPSs in the ambulance. So it's a very slippery slope to all the resources that we would need to have in order to be successful with the structure that we currently have. We do have Find My iPhone. So all of the cars, including the limo care cars and the ambulances, they all have iPhones. So we can, if we get in a pinch, if we can't get a hold of a crew, what is our first thought? They're dead. They're not at Old Chicago. Yeah. Yeah, literally, that's like the, pit in your stomach mic click. You hear a mic click, and the crew's on an ULFA, and it's them queuing up. They're just having radio problems, but you're sending police and fire emergent because you think they're in a bad situation. So it is really, really important that we're getting the proper information, especially the information of where you are. Denver Health, they have cameras on all the street corners. The crew can say, hey, we can't find our patient. And they can say, oh, go around to the back door. They're waiting right there. We don't have that capability, so we need to get genuine and authentic information as to where you are. We've never said no to a bathroom break, never said no to a food break. It's not that hard. It's not a difficult concept to just communicate where you are. Also, closest hospital destinations. It's important, when you're on a 911 call, that we know who is the closest hospital so that we can check the divert status. And sometimes you may have a new EMT that's in the car, and they may not necessarily know. One of our EMTs, he was very, very new, and he just got trained on limo care, and was coming off a limo or on IFT, but worked limo care that day. Came in his black shirt and was done for the day, and I took a call that was, I believe it was chest pain, from the convention center. Bob sitting on the other side of the wall. I said, Bob, can you run a call? He said, I got to get my uniform. I said, you best get to getting. And Brandon Stevenson was sitting right there. I said, you want to run a call? He goes, sure. So Brandon's checking out the ambulance. I get him a blue shirt. Bob's getting his stuff out of his car, and they are, get backed out. Brandon changes his clothes, And Bob's like, he's like going into the comm center. He's like, I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm going to change my clothes. I was like, no, you're not. You're changing the ambulance. So he literally changed his clothes in the ambulance. They went emergent to the call. But the point of the story is this EMT. Did I already say his name? I already disclosed his identity.
Mm-hmm.
It was Brandon Stevenson. Jay, dang it. Tried to make it anonymous. Anyway, so he was brand new. So they get backed out. They're getting ready to go. Bob's jumping in the back to change his clothes. And Brandon Stevenson's just like looking at me. I'm like standing right at the door to the break room. And he's getting ready to go. And he's looking at me. And I said, are you okay? He goes, yeah. He's like, do you want me to send you directions? He goes, that'd be good. So it's really, really important for us to know how to get there. Because sometimes that happens where, the crews are like, we need help. It's really important for us to have access to that information and ultimately know it ourselves. This is a map that we have at our disposal. It was made by Charlie Siffler. So these are all of the facilities that we frequent. So you'll see this is Center at Lincoln, this is Powerback Lakewood, this is Powerback Lafayette, and this is the Life Care of Evergreen. The Center at Northridge is right in here. And again, we gotta add that this is really new for us. These are all of our contracted venues. Who can tell me what this red line is? It's right next to I-25. This one's I-25. What is this red line? There's a very specific landmark right here.
Horsesville.
Nope. Elitch's. Do we have a contract with Elitch's? No. Do we still go there for response calls? Heck yes, we do. So we are one of their mutual aid providers for ambulance, and we run during the summer a fair amount of ambulance trips out of Elitch's. This, if you've ever been there, specifically in an ambulance, it's really, really hard to get in. Obviously, you're not just walking up with your pram and going through the main ticketing booth. So it's really important that we have this information, even if it's a facility that we're not specifically contracted with, we need to know exactly how to guide you into that facility as well. This one's the convention center. You'll see there are a lot of green dots on this. That's because there are multiple entrances, multiple landmarks with different names. We sat down about a year ago probably and discussed all of the major landmarks at all of our facilities, and each venue supervisor came up with, okay, here's what we're going to call this specific entrance so that we're all speaking the same language. And it is important that we have this readily available. We do have it readily available, so it's important that we actually refer to the resources that we have. So I also just want to communicate to you guys, like, if you get in a bind and you don't know where you're going and you're going to Elitch's, you can say, hey, can you look it up on the map for me? Because now we do have the information. These are all of our hospitals, our main hospitals that we go to at least. So this is St. Anthony's in Lakewood, St. Anthony's at 84th, and the 144th campus. So it's important that we know where all those are. Protocols and call classifications. So like I said, we determine the call type based on the two basic pieces of information that we're given, the diagnosis and the treatment required for transport. We don't necessarily care what they're going to get, when they get up to pavilions or whatever. We need to know what does our staff need to do, because that is what the call type is. Who here knows if we do CCT? Critical care transport.
Oh my God.
So it's ALS, BLS, and CCT, critical care transport. Okay, do we got a no? Anybody else? You got a yes? You got an ish? So, CCT, critical care transport, is a specific piece of terminology used to describe a higher level of care. But, like I said, some of us are speaking different languages. So, for instance, depending on who your medical director is, they might refer to a call as CCT, or they might not. We have an extended set of protocols through St. Anthony's where we're given specific waivers to do, for instance, a transport ventilator. Most agencies, so if we tried to release a call to AMR that had a ventilator, we would say, we've got a CCT transport for you guys, because their medical director sees that as CCT. Our medical director lets us operate under ALS, BLS, and ALS level 2. So it's really important for the dispatchers to know what these classifications are so that we can ultimately attain the call. Because sometimes a caller will call and say, you know, do you do CCT? What would happen if they just said no and hung up? You say, what's going on with the patient? Because again, those are the things that we need to know, you know, diagnosis and treatment required for transport. We need to get those before we can just definitively decide if we can do it or not. Which includes, I mean, I can speak for myself in knowing that I know the protocols. It helps me because I'm an EMT. I can also say that there have been many, many times where a paramedic has called me and said, we can't do this call, I can't take blood products. And I say, yes, you actually can. So it's really, really important for us to know the protocols, not just them, because literally we've had our crew members refuse to run calls because it's a medication or some sort of treatment that they don't think that they can provide, but they actually can. Same thing with bariatric. So say, you know, our main bariatric rig is ambulance 10. We typically put any patient over 350 pounds on ambulance 10 because it has the winch and the ramps. But it has the exact same stretcher as all the other ambulances, with the exception of one that keeps getting switched in and out, but let's not go there. Those prams are rated for patients up to 700 pounds. So if I've got a 3-man crew and it's Travis and Zettelmoyer and Eric Williams, I just say, hey, like I've got a patient, it's borderline, it's 400, the patient's 400 pounds. Do you feel comfortable doing this? And they're like, oh yeah, of course. But as a general rule of thumb, we're gonna put a patient that's 350 pounds or over onto a crew that has ambulance 10 so that they have the proper equipment. But say ambulance 10 is out of service. If they say, can you do a bariatric call for me today? We don't say, no, our rig's out of service. What's going on with the patient? Because we need to know more information before we can properly establish the call type. So ultimately, we have to know what that information is in order to make an educated guess. And again, they do have the resources available to make that determination. Vent equipment. As I said before, a ventilator, that's ALS level 2. Most of the time, someone from this building is running that ventilator to a crew who's on scene somewhere, and we run it to them. It's important that people in this building know what equipment they need. There's, 3 packs. The actual ventilator, we always turn it on, make sure that it has proper battery, that it actually turns on, make sure it has the power cord. There's 2 other pouches with it, has all the ventilator tubing. There's a blue and a white, one's pediatric, one's adult. It has a pediatric CPAP mask. The adult CPAP mask is in the airway kit. We need to know that stuff because we can't run you a ventilator that doesn't turn on. We can't run you a ventilator without the tubing or the proper attachments. There's a couple attachments that it comes with as well. We got to make sure it has the power cord. So it's important that they know that information. And again, they have the resources available to make that determination for you. And don't let them get away with saying that they don't have it available or they don't know, because you do. Wheelchair transport qualifications. So, in order to be a wheelchair transport candidate, there is a huge difference between a patient that sits in a wheelchair and can be transported by wheelchair. Those are very different activities, as I found. In order to be a candidate for wheelchair through our agency, most of our contracted facilities, they understand these qualifications. They will order the proper level of service based on what they know about the patient. But these are pertinent questions that we're asking to make sure we're sending the correct level of service. Can the patient stand and pivot? If the answer is yes, we're thinking, okay, it's probably wheelchair. Do they have any dementia or altered mental status? Sometimes, Aubrey, altered mental status and like Alzheimer's get lumped into the same thing. There's a reason they're listed separately because they're not the same thing. If they have Alzheimer's and they live every day with Alzheimer's, it's not an ambulance transport just because, it's not a 911 call because they've lived with it for 5 years. It's a new onset type deal. But if they do have one of those two things, dementia, Alzheimer's, or altered mental status, we're thinking ambulance. We can't have someone in the back of the wheelchair car with nobody back there unbuckling themselves. BMI of over 50 and or a patient of over 350 pounds. If they meet either of these criteria, the 50 or the 350 pounds, it's ambulance, because we're not going to put any of our staff into a bad situation, because that it's too much to navigate. If you have ever pushed anybody in a wheelchair anywhere, specifically like up a ramp into a doctor's office, it is hard. It's hard. Obviously I'm small, but I believe I speak for other people when I say it's not an easy feat, no matter how big the patient is. It's a balancing act. And so we don't put our staff into situations where they're going to have to navigate any of these items, any of them. So sometimes we run into situations where a crew wants to downgrade a call. So they will show up to a BLS transport. They've been specifically dispatched to a BLS transport, and they will call and they'll say, I think we should run this as a wheelchair call. Does anyone have any feedback on why that would be, or what happens if that happens? What do you think happens if a crew gets on scene and they decide they're just going to run it as a wheelchair?
Do they have the ambulance stretcher?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I learned this can be good if the patient can't stand and pivot. So let's say you have a patient 300 pounds in a wheelchair, and now we need to get them from the wheelchair to the stretcher. They can't stand or pivot or support any of their own body weight. This is actually now a bigger problem than just having a wheelchair. So downgrading it is more beneficial to everybody in that case, I believe, because moving that patient can be a task.
So like I said, so it's actually, to answer that directly, it's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like I said, just because the patient can sit in a wheelchair doesn't mean that they are eligible for transport via wheelchair. That is the whole reason. If they cannot stand and pivot, no transport via wheelchair at all. And so I understand, yeah, sometimes crews will call, this happens a lot actually, they'll call and say, hey, we just got here, but the patient's sitting in their wheelchair. Can they stand and pivot? Well, no. Okay. So regardless of what the patient's position is when you get to the facility, if they can't stand and pivot, do not pass go, do not collect 200. It's ambulance. Same thing. Dementia or altered mental status. If they don't know, sometimes they're pleasantly confused, which is what we hear from the liaisons all the time. Sometimes they're pleasantly confused, but if they don't know who they are, where they're going, that could potentially be a dangerous situation for a limo care driver. So again, it's ambulance.
I used to love making those calls too. They're just pleasantly confused.
Yeah, pleasantly confused.
Can they stand in pivot? Sure, why not? Just take them.
Yeah.
And then every time you would call me back, you would jerk. We took so many. So I know the frustration with that.
Yeah. So we want to make sure that we're getting the proper level of service the first time. So we want to make sure we're asking pertinent questions to whoever the liaison is, because ultimately what's going to end up happening, we're going to get on scene with a wheelchair, the patient can't stand and pivot, and then you got to wait 2 hours for a stretcher. So you may as well have ordered the proper level of service in the first place. Downgrading a wheelchair. Out of all the times that a crew has called and wanted to downgrade a wheelchair, it has been successfully done probably 1% of the time. We don't want to do that. And it's not because of billing. That's always the answer we get. Do not downgrade a call. So if you get dispatched to a wheelchair call and you see, say the patient can stand and pivot. What if they're a psych patient? That's not a good determinant of a wheelchair. You're not going to send a psych patient via wheelchair. So based upon just that one thing, you can't properly decide the level of service. So if you just say, oh, the patient can stand and pivot, well, does the call also say COPD? Sam, is that a billable diagnosis? That's a billable diagnosis.
Or you get the fact that dementia patients aren't always altered mental status. At times they can be great and remember everything that's going on. And then all of a sudden, like the flick of a switch, it's over.
Yeah, they're unbuckling their seatbelt. They're trying to get out. So do not downgrade a call, or so we also have the ambulance crews use the LimoCare PCR from the app if they're running a wheelchair overflow, which means that we don't have availability by ambulance or by wheelchair. So we're going to put it on an ambulance and run it as what we call a wheelchair overflow. Unless you are specifically dispatched a wheelchair overflow call, do not run it as anything other than BLS or ALS. People will also, the other big rebuttal that we always get is, well, this patient doesn't need an ambulance. I don't want the patient to get a bill. The insurance isn't going to cover this. They're not a candidate. For one, you don't know all the billable diagnoses. You don't know all of that information. You are not a biller. And if you are, we're hiring. Please apply. Okay? You just don't know. You don't know what diagnoses are and are not. They think they do. Most of the time, it's not the case. So let's say, I don't want the patient to get a bill. Well, guess what? Insurance doesn't cover wheelchair. So if you're going to downgrade it to a wheelchair call, you just got that patient a bill. Instead of, it may have been a billable diagnosis. They may have very well needed an ambulance. Even Medicare would recognize that. Instead, their insurance gets billed for an ambulance because that's the proper level of service for the patient. But instead, you've now just gained this patient a wheelchair bill because you've made that decision. And most of the time, not had the education to provide the proper level of service. So downgrading calls, we really don't do it. Unless it's a legit, like, we call the liaison and we say, hey, our driver just got on scene, our ambulance crew just got on scene. The patient can stand and pivot, like no altered mental status, like they're walking, talking, they've got a broken arm, they don't need any pain meds. And they'll say, oh, shoot, you're right, I meant to do that by wheelchair. Unless that's the case, it's ambulance. Upgrading wheelchair calls, we do this quite a bit as well because the improper level of service is ordered in the first place. So sometimes we'll find that, maybe there's a new liaison at a contracted facility and they don't understand that Medicare would pay for an ambulance trip and the patient needs an ambulance. Sometimes they'll just be like, oh, well, it's wheelchair. Or they'll be like, yeah, I think they can stand and pivot. Or they're on oxygen, but I think it's like 8 liters usually. And you're like, okay, well, that's ambulance because they can't be above 6. But then they'll be like, oh, no, actually, the last I checked, it was 5. That happens all the time. So we get on scene with a wheelchair, and guess what? It's not wheelchair criteria. So that happens a lot, too. So we don't downgrade, but we do upgrade. And most of the time, like I said, we don't want to put anybody in a bad situation, specifically a LimoCare driver, when they're by themselves. So most of the time, it's based primarily off the comfort of the driver. So if they say, hey, this doesn't seem right, this patient, they just got pain meds, they're kind of loopy, I don't feel comfortable doing this, we'll upgrade and we'll send an ambulance because that's not fair to put a LimoCare driver in that specific situation. So how dispatch can help, or how crews can help dispatch. So there's a few things where just a basic understanding of each other's jobs and a basic understanding of, what makes us all tick, that we can really, really be great because of if we just find ways to communicate and kind of do these little things. Shoot times. Like I said, it is really important that you are packaged and ready to go within 15 minutes. That is the standard that has been set forth. You have 15 minutes to get in service unless you're communicating with us otherwise. We got to change our house tank. We got to clean our ambulance, something like that. We got to restock. It's the first of the month. They have to do their inventory on the first of the month. We get that. Just communicate. We want to make sure we're not going to take a 911 call when you're not really in service. The other thing in regards to shoot times is You need to be packaged and ready to go. Backed out, whether it's in the bay and you're ready to shoot out of here, or you're in front of the building, one of those. Those are great options. That does not include sitting in the break room. That does not include standing over whoever is dispatching. That's a big, big one where, crew members will come in and they'll look like, how's the board looking today? And it's like, and I can't tell you how many times, it's my stock reply at this point, where they'll say, what do you have for us? And I say, I will wait for your in-service call. Because that is the standard. We need to all be following the same standard and make sure that we are all doing our part to communicate and to help each other have this thing be really, really efficient. So we want to make sure that we're in service within 15 minutes and that you are calling over the radio saying, dispatch, this is Medic 10, we are in service, where would you like us? And then we will send you from there. There's no hovering in dispatch, there's no waiting for you to eat, there's none of that, unless you've communicated ahead of time. But we expect you to be in service and be out on the road. So in service calls. So that's a big one. Like I said, you don't always know if we're on the phone. So please be quiet when you're in the comm center, especially if the lights are up. Calling direct extensions, like I spoke of before, make sure you have access to this information, guys. It's in Crew Scheduler. Every single person uses Crew Scheduler. Bernie uses Crew Scheduler. Roger uses Crew Scheduler. No one is exempt from this process. You have the information. It is right there. It tells you whose extension is what. Please call their direct extensions and do not call the comm center. Standing by. So when you say, say you do say, Medic 10, we're in service, where would you like us? And we say, stand by. That doesn't mean that we don't want to talk to you, that we don't like you, that we are blowing you off, ignoring you, none of that. We're usually on the phone. As you've noticed, I talked about the bulk amount of calls. There are a lot of calls and very few of us. There are many, many times throughout any given day, like at, say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where I'm on a call, Danielle's on a call, Nicole's on a call, Carrie's on a call, Bob's on a call, Ethan's in there on a call, and we also have 2 other lines on hold on each phone. There are times that exists. So please give us the benefit of the doubt. A lot of times too, guys, it's because we didn't hear you. Because, radio problems or whatever. Those do happen too. We do have technical difficulties. So if you're told to stand by and an hour goes by, we didn't hear you. Plain and simple. So make sure you're checking in. If we tell you to stand by and even 10 minutes goes by, just give us a landline and say, hey, we called in service. Did you hear us? We're ready to go. Where would you like us? Don't automatically assume it's because we're blowing you off. Clear communication. Who knows the proper answer when a dispatcher asks you this question? Travis? So I call you, you pick up the phone, and I say, what's your status? You say?
925.
Cool. Where you are, what you're doing. What's your status? If you're on your way to a call, and we say, say it's 84th campus, and we've sent you from here, and 45 minutes go by, you should have been there long ago. We're going to call you. We're going to say, what's your status? And you're going to say, hopefully you communicated, beforehand, before we relate, so we could kind of be proactive. But in the event that does happen, the answer we're expecting is where you are, what you're doing. That's the answer that we're expecting from you. Responding with your location. If we say Medic 10, your answer should not be Medic 10. Your answer should be 8th and I-25. You should always answer with your location. I can't tell you the amount of times that we have been taking a call with Denver's dispatch for a 911 call, and we're fighting with you over the radio while I'm on the phone and they can hear our entire conversation. So I'm saying Medic 10, and you say Medic 10, and I say, where are you? And they say, we're on our way to post. That's an activity, not a location. I need to know where you are, and I need to know now. I need to know when I raise you exactly where you are and what you're doing. And it's not because we're trying to micromanage you. It's not because we want to keep our thumb on you. We got to know where you are. We cannot do our jobs without that piece of information. Food breaks. Again, just communicate. We've never said no to food, never said no to a bathroom break. Just make sure you're communicating, we know where you are. Speaking of bathroom breaks, evening and night shift assistance. This isn't a requirement by any means, but it sure would be nice if you got your, you're coming off your shift and it's 10 p.m. and there's a dispatcher in there by themselves. Maybe hey, you want to use the bathroom while I'm here? That would be go a really long way. Because they're in there by themselves from usually 6 to 11. So they've been there for a few hours by themselves. We do have the headsets, but it's really not a good choice to be in the bathroom on the phone. So yeah, can we bring you back food? That would also go a really long way. Obviously we have access to ordering things in, but just having that common courtesy. We check on you guys. Hey, you've been at post for a while. You guys want to stop and get some food? That should be nice. Short story. This one is a big one. Same thing. Just like when we reach out to you and we want your location, when you call us, you better be saying what it is you have to say. Nothing else. So people will say I got to this last patient late and now we're at this and the doctor won't see him and now I gotta blah, blah, blah. It's like, you could have just said, the patient can be seen, I gotta take this patient back now. Lead with that. Tell us what you need. We have all the resources available, as you just learned, to help you with whatever you need help with. Lead with that. We need to know we're reactive by nature. We need to know what it is that we need to react to at any given time. So say immediately what we can help you with. I'm gonna be late. I need to take this patient back now. This patient is going to be ALS and we're a BLS crew. Something like that, where it's direct and efficient communication with us. Responding with your location. This other one is huge as well. When we first started IFT, we initially started with the process of, obviously all radio traffic is, hey, you, it's me. So we would call you or say you're at destination and you say, dispatch medicate, and we say medicate, and they say, dispatch medicate, we're at destination 123.6. What we really want you to do is to just say, medicate, we are at destination 123.6. Just say what you gotta say. Say what you gotta say. If we didn't hear you, we'll ask you to repeat. But it's going to take far less time than us going back and forth every single time. Say what you got to say. Just come up on the radio and say what you have to say. There's always someone by radio, always. So now I want to know, and I guess the three of you, it would be the most applicable, but how dispatch can help you. So obviously those are some ways that you can help us and that we can all be more efficient together. But I'm interested to see if you guys have any feedback on what we can do for you and how we can better assist you and how we can kind of make this whole thing more efficient.
The one thing I love is the new CAD system. I did enjoy getting those texts with the patient name and birthday and chief complaint because let's say we're en route 40 minutes up to Longmont U. If it's a repeat patient, I can find them in the system, but I need the birthday and the first and last name to get it pulled up from the CAD for a repeat patient. Birthday is really the only thing that is, I wish was still.
If they're a repeat patient.
Yeah.
You can pull it up in the CAD, pull the name up in the CAD.
Or even
as a
forget that,
repeat.
just for me.
Wait, so why do you need it? Sorry.
Because I can pull up their information, their history.
Got it. Got it.
So I can go into an AMS, maybe knowing they're type 1 diabetic, okay, understandable, just to get a little more. But the birthday just helps solidify pre-game stuff, if that makes sense. Like before we get there, I'm on the computer, I'm in the CAD pulling. I like to get to the patient and have at least like 60 to 70% of that done. Right. Because on a busy day you can. So yeah, the only thing is if we could, those birthdays were really. Right.
I wonder if, let's talk to Michael and see if there's a way that, because I know that we can, with collaboration with the state, we can get certain things to populate from the information that gets pulled from the CAD. So let's try that on the back end. What we want to avoid.
That system's great. I love it.
Look back.
She went to Pepsi. She's at Pepsi.
Huh?
She's at Pepsi.
Okay. You almost done?
Yeah. This is my last slide. Yeah, let's get with Michael and ask him that question specifically. What I want to avoid is we just bought this new fancy CAD module, and if we're going to go back to paging you guys anyway, that was a waste of $10,000.
No, maybe we can include it
Yeah.
in the CAD is what
Yeah. And I think there is a way to do that. We just need to ask Michael and see if
that
we
would
can.
be great. That's it.
Yeah. What about you, Christy? Rob?
Just one thing, when they cancel a call, I get told like 3 times the call's canceled, but I'm waiting for my patient who's having a seizure, getting ready to transport. They slip a call in at 1:30, and I'm not getting it either. The phone's not ringing, the phone's vibrating. One of them I wear in my pocket so I know that it's vibrating. And Dusty even tried the phones. I think we just need to make sure the phones beep and vibrate and go through them all. And she was going to have somebody look at that phone, but I don't know which one it is.
Okay.
But I'm coming down I-70 from Evergreen and say, well, you're missing a call at 1:30. Well, you know, at that point, I'm not picking my phone up driving down the I-70.
So is it an issue? It's a technology issue? Is what? Let me
Technology.
correct me if I'm wrong. This is what I'm hearing you say.
Technology is, after you cancel the call, as far as I'm concerned right now, it's canceled. That call, when you slip something back into 1300, I'd like a call, if it's possible, to say, oh yeah, even though 3 people told you you don't have a 1300 call, that, hey, this just came in, can you handle it? And I can tell you I'm in Evergreen right now. I have to wait for the patient to have a seizure. So those kind of things are slipping in.
So let's talk offline about that. Yeah, because it sounds like it was maybe an isolated incident because you have very specific chronological.
Well, some of the other people are
time
not
of
here,
events.
they're getting the same thing. We just got to make sure I'm not purposely missing a patient.
Oh yeah, of course not.
It's just
Of course
like,
not.
why aren't you there? The people are mad. And it's like, well, I had all this red, and now we've slipped a person in there.
So is it that they are not communicating, or is it you're not receiving the communication?
Probably receiving or not receiving.
Okay.
But
So it
like
is
I
a
said,
problem with a human, or is it a problem with technology?
I think it's a human thing. I think it's just been following through. If you canceled it 3 times and all of a sudden you put it in, I think getting a call on something like that just.
So Rob, let me help and see if I can. So you've been canceled off a call. You've been told by Hannah, Danielle, and Nicole that you've been canceled. And then we take a call at that 1 o'clock hour, or 1:30, whatever, and you're not receiving that. So you're not getting that information that all of a sudden you now have a 1:30 where that was originally a canceled call. So you need that information given to you either via phone call or text.
Yes.
And we're
Obviously,
missing
we
that.
know we need to provide you that communication.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to establish with you, which is why I wanted to talk to you offline, is that is it a person that's not reaching out to you, or because you first said
Well,
that you couldn't feel the phone
It's
vibrating.
easy to type something in for you guys. Now, am I getting it out there in the field? If I'm not responding back to you like we normally do.
But
I'll
is
call you.
it the information not being sent, or you not receiving it? That's what I'm trying to get at.
It's not
Because
re-
ultimately, the question I'm asking is, how can the dispatchers, as human beings, help you? And when it's a technology error, like Travis and I discussed, we can
Yeah.
troubleshoot those issues. So that's what I'm trying to get
Yeah,
at.
no, if you.
And I'm happy to talk to you more about it offline.
Yeah, that's fine.
Does anybody have any additional feedback or questions, concerns, anything that we can do to help you guys, to make your lives easier, even you guys, Jamie or Billing or Aubrey, or no? No? Okay. Your Skype's been updated.
Yay.
Thank you
Oh,
all
that's
for
on that
coming.
computer.
Have a great day.
Awesome. 1 hour, 39 minutes.
Oh, that was long.
You bet.